Wait a minute. What do you mean it went? An error occurred. Okay, let's try it again. We all have problems, but sometimes there's just that one problem. That problem, you might be saying, I don't know how to fix it. I don't have the method. I don't have the system. I don't have the process. I don't have the resources. I don't have the right people. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough. I don't have customers. We've all been there. We've all been frustrated. We've got that problem and we don't know how to solve it. The greatest minds have solved that problem. And I want to bring them to you so you do not have to be faced with that problem anymore. There's always that problem. But how do we solve it? Welcome, Mr. Coffey.
I am glad to be here.
It is so and I know you're kind of a little bit under the weather for our audience, but you know what? It's going to be impactful and we are going to solve a problem.
Okay, let's do it. Are we fixing leaky sinks or hooking up a new DVD player? What are we doing?
Well, we're going to solve the problem about how do you decide when you're a mid-level executive and people are coming after you, the recruiters are coming after you. Do you go to a private equity firm? What does branding look like? What are the strategies behind that? So before we get into that, though, I just want to ask you, I mean, you're a veteran. Thank you for your sacrifice and for your family sacrifice. Pilot. You have, exited multiple businesses. There's only 3,000 billion-dollar companies in the world, and you've exited 2 of them. We're going to talk about that later. You're world renowned for your culture strategies, your employee first thinking, but more importantly, you're a dad.
I am. I'm a girl dad.
You're a girl dad. So
I do have an elder son too. So if he's listening, I don't want to be.
You don't want to exclude him, right?
But I'm a pound girl dad. Yes.
So tell me, in the intersection of all that's going on, personal, professional, career, what is the one thing, that one event that taught you the most in the intersection of all of that?
Oh, wow. God, life is an experience. And, I tell my elder kids, when I was a young guy and climbing the corporate ladder at GE, it started in the military, but after the military, when I was climbing the corporate ladder, it's like, boy, I apologize every day. I was a rotten dad. I was chasing promotions and climbing the corporate ladder, and about every 18 months you're moving from one place to another because someone offered you a new title and money. And it's like, boy, those life lessons, there's not one intersection. There's a recognition at some point, and I do tell people too, it's my father, rest his soul, passed away last year, but 90 years old. Wow. Grew up during the Great Depression, World War II, kind of the Korean War era. And, his informed way of thinking was living and growing up in times when everything was rationed and there wasn't enough of anything. Yeah. And so he really instilled in all of us kids kind of those values of, hey, title and money is how you really measure your success in life, and not your debt, but your cash in the bank. And so I was always chasing kind of title and money, and somewhere along the way, I learned that lesson that, hey, don't forget family. Family's more important. And so, my elder kids paid the price for that for sure. And so I apologize to them all the time. Sorry, I was chasing a dream. And now that I have a 9-year-old, and the fact that I'm doing this, call it a second time around, I'm able, as a much more mature person, to have learned those lessons. But there was not one strategic pivot or point, where that crossroad happened. It's like I can look back and reflect now and say, boy, I've been very successful, albeit for,
Yeah.
the fact that I learned a little bit later in life that you can't replace family. Family is the most important thing there is.
Well, and don't you think though, like, I mean, I have twin daughters who's 17 years old. They've seen me, up at 3, bed at 12, doing the grind, right? Because entrepreneurship and building a business, it's a grind and you got to show up persistently all the time and you make sacrifices, right? And so there's a lot of sacrifices that you made. Would your older children today be, how would they explain the sacrifice? And would it be a positive or would it be a negative or would it be a combination of both?
I think it'd be a combination for sure. But I know, my elder son talk about following in footsteps. So I had an
Yeah,
engineering technical background and, found my way to private equity. He has an engineering background and he is running engineering in
yeah,
a private equity backed software company in
wow,
Austin, Texas, down the road.
yeah,
He got his first payday not too long ago. So chip off the old block, his company sold for a couple billion. So I
wow,
think that, some we learn. I think all the moving probably made the kids a lot more adaptable as
yeah,
adults. Had
yeah,
to make friends, moving and things like that. But at the same time, I think you learn. We're a product of our experiences, and
yeah.
everything in life. Someone once said is an educational experience. Some are good, some are bad, but you learn from them all. And so I think there's probably a combination of both.
Isn't that the truth? Well, I think we learn more. I often say we learn more from our failures than we do from our successes, but
We
more
certainly
importantly,
do.
right? Like success is great and we should pat ourselves on the back and everyone that's around us because is always a team play. It's never an individual play when we make success. But I think learning from our failures and more importantly, not making those same mistakes twice is really important. And so if you were to say one failure that really gave you a pivot, that really said, holy shit, like that's the time when I went, wow, like the light bulb went off in my brain. What would that be?
Well, not to get too personal, but I'd say the failure of my first marriage,
Yeah.
I think that's the only thing in my life I ever failed at, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Aside from that, though, when I think about business and how it relates to business, I think about the young buck, 30 something year old CEO for the first time. And there was, don't laugh too much, LinkedIn Nation or people out there on Twitter or wherever you're catching this. It's
Yeah,
like,
it's been,
but there
sit
was,
with the
if you
comment.
think, if you think there's some level of
Let it feel
arrogance,
your hair.
now that goes with being a CEO of 20 some odd years and a best-selling author and all that stuff, it's like, boy, you should have seen me in my 30s. I was
Wow.
a larger than life guy. And I thought, boy, it's like I have all the answers and, it's my way or the highway. And, I've got this, I've got this. And I think, just you wake up one day and you realize, boy, when I was in my 30s, I didn't know anything. And, after 21 years of being a CEO, what did I learn? I learned patience. I learned mature, as I matured as an
Yeah,
individual, I learned when to act, when not to act, when to ask for help. I think that's probably the biggest life
yeah,
lesson that a leader, who's successful learns is, hey, it's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to need help.
yeah,
It's okay, and I talk about that in some of my books about
yeah,
consultants and working with consultants and bringing in outside help to give you expertise and surge capacity that you may not have in your business. And I know as a 30 something year old, I used to think about, consultants like, hey, there's those who do and those who can't consult. Hell, now I'm a consultant, so
yeah.
I think I've come full circle in that one.
I like that. I like that. So, do you believe that there is an ability to really have a balance in life? Or do you think that it's all about integration and finding that right chemistry equation? Because I believe it's a chemistry equation based on, your marriage, your relationships, your children, your businesses. I don't think there's a work-life balance equation, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, my thoughts are they're somewhat integrated because I don't shut off work ever, and I
Yeah.
don't shut off being a dad ever, or
Yeah.
a husband, or so I mean there are times where I think of this as this life is going on. There are times where the business requires more of my
Yeah.
attention, and then there's those times where family needs more of my attention, and it's not really about finding a balance and saying, okay, family time, can't do anything, relating to work, or, it's work time. I think it's trying to make sure that you're addressing the needs of all of those different constituencies in such a manner that there winds up being you're taking care of the needs of all. And I don't ever stop working. I just get up earlier, so I get up at 4 o'clock every day. And at 4 o'clock, I know I've got 2-3 hours solid. My daughter gets up at 6:30. Mom's usually up at 6. So I've got a good couple of hours of 100% quiet time where if I need to focus on either follow up, it's when my books were written, is at 4 o'clock in the morning. Excuse me. That's probably why they're not the world's best literary.
They are really good books.
But it's like, it's my me time. It's 4 to 6. I'm not taking time away from anybody else. That's my time where I can really take care and knock out some things. And, and then the day starts going, and, I roll with it.
Well, and it's interesting because I have that same belief, right? Like, I'm up anywhere between 4 and 5 a.m. And if I need to do something that I need to execute on, and I know that my day is packed, well, then I'll get up at 3:30 to do it, right?
Yeah.
Because the reality is that is the reality, right? Like, things need to be done, tasks need to be executed on, and there's only so many hours in the day.
Yep. Likewise, don't look for me to respond to an email at 10 o'clock.
I'm the same. I'm the same. Exactly. Yeah. So, leadership, there's a lot of conversation. My good friend, he talks about leadership from the back of the room as opposed to the front of the room. So I'm curious, because I know you've a lot of thought around culture. And do you believe that the greatest leaders lead from the back of the room or the front of the room? What's your belief on that, Adam?
Without getting into semantics, let me just say that I learned how to be what I call a servant leader in the military. And the military has been cranking out servant leaders for a few hundred years more than the business world has defined the term. And so I'm a person who learned early, that it takes a collective group to find success. It's not an individual success. And, as a guy who really climbed the corporate ladder and held every job on an org chart a person can hold in a services business, all of my experiences in services, I valued people at every level of an organization. And so not to sound corny, but most service businesses, if you can't store your product in a box and put it on a shelf and then go get it when you need it, then your product is people. And if your product is people, you better take good care of those people. And so I like to think about, I never manage revenue, I manage culture. And if my product is people, I can't store service in a box. So if I take care of people, I get an engaged workforce. They take care of customers. Customers love it when they get taken care of and get good service. They give us more stuff, and revenue rains from the sky. And so the secret to success is not to manage revenue, it's to manage culture. And in a services business, I call myself a servant leader. I care about everybody. I care about, a person in a truck. I care about the janitor in a plant. I care about all of these people. They're human beings. And, God bless me. But I have a responsibility, and I'm glad some of the laws have actually changed, because there's not just a fiduciary responsibility to shareholders to produce profit, but there is also a responsibility to take care of employees and to do what's in their best interest as well. And so I think the biggest life lesson I ever learned as a CEO was that profit and culture are not mutually exclusive. Yeah. You can actually do both. And I would tell you that to maximize potential in a business, culture has to be a big piece of that, because no worker, at any level in an organization is going to give you their blood, sweat, and tears unless they feel appreciated and they feel that they're taken care of. So I've learned that I can maximize the potential of a business. I can maximize shareholder return if I invest in people, take care of people, build a strong culture, and so I call that servant leadership. I don't know if you call that leading out front, leading from the back. I don't know about that one, but
I think it's both. Quite
Yeah.
honestly, I
Well,
think you have to lead from the front and you have to take a step in the back and allow others to lead as well, right? Peter Clark says, yeah, and I'm a little slow on the comment, but he says, I've heard this from many successful people that the 4 a.m. is the golden hour to start. Peter's a great friend of mine. So thank you, Peter. Appreciate that. It's
well, hey, Peter, let me just say something. There is a very interesting study that was done by Harvard, and I believe if you just Google, time management, successful people, Harvard Business Review, I think you can find this. But essentially, what they did is they interviewed a bunch of CEOs.
Yep.
And it wasn't what made you successful. We're just going to take that for granted. You are successful. You're a CEO of a large company. You've been doing this for a while. And they looked at the attributes of time allocation.
Oh,
And
wow.
they were looking for correlations between high performing individuals and how they manage their time. And I think that the most interesting takeaway to me was that almost 25% of the calendar time of the vast majority of these people was scheduled to be me time, to be alone time, to be retrospective time. And even if it wasn't scheduled, people like you and I who get up early and
Yep.
create that time, the most successful people in the world, if you want to say title and being CEOs of big companies is a measure of that. One of their key attributes that they have in common almost across the board is they spend a lot of time alone being introspective and thinking strategically and planning for the
Yep.
future. And that's an interesting study. People who are out there listening might find enjoyable to read. It's kind of what are the time management habits and how do people allocate their time when they're successful? And that was the biggest key takeaway for me in that study.
Well, it's interesting because you said, a lot of me time, right? Like sitting down and really strategically thinking, what does that playbook? You talk a lot about playbooks look like. And when you were talking about culture, it's interesting because I co-founded a company called Belongify. And our mantra really is we put the me and the we back in the right kind of way. And it's all about a people first driven organization, right? And it starts with the leadership. And how do you really create those conditions for people not just to belong, but what you talked about, to thrive, right? To excel, to be able to outperform each other, to be able to feel safe in a comfortable way that they can show up as themselves and really have that meaningful contribution. It's really important. And it does start at leadership. So, how does that play a role for a CEO who's thinking about exiting a company and is thinking about moving over to the private equity firm of another company that is owned by private equity? How does that play a role?
So I think anybody who owns a business, God bless you, to be successful, to create an empire, a business, regardless of what size, if you have an asset built that you're potentially thinking about monetizing, I think of it in many different stages. First, I think, when is the right time to sell? When is the right time to bring in a partner? I wrote an article for Forbes not too long ago where I coined the rule of 130, which is take your age, take the amount of your net worth that's tied up in an illiquid asset known as your business. If it's over 130, that seems to be about the right number where it's time to think about doing something. This world is so volatile and is moving so fast that I think many people who are out there sitting on large personal assets that are illiquid really ought to be evaluating, how do I potentially monetize, get some chips off the table, and diversify my personal world in case something goes south in the world or impacts my business. And it happens. It just happens. And the amount of these events, I'll say, that are happening in the world today seem to be happening more frequently and to some degree more extreme. Wars do happen. Look at Ukraine.
Yep.
And unfortunately, planes do fly into buildings from time to time, and there are pandemics and businesses are shuttered. These things can happen, and when they do, it can have a huge negative impact on a person. So I think a person needs to really think about risk and how to de-risk their life, and their family's protection, because that business you value so much today, where all your money's tied up, could get hammered. It could get hit hard and leave you then without that umbrella to give you that coverage in the rain. And so I think it's important to understand and identify that you've got risk. So once you've decided I'm going to do something, then I think a lot of entrepreneurs unfortunately just get up at the last second and they think I'm going to sell my business today. And you know what? I'm pretty good at running a company, and I built this thing, and it's a lot of money, and I got a lot of money, and I got a nice house, and there's a lot of money, and so I know exactly what I'm doing when it's time to sell. And that's the biggest mistake I find entrepreneurs making. As a guy who's bought, dozens and dozens of businesses and has built, billion-dollar businesses. I can tell you that the world and universe of buyers is very sophisticated, and they can smell a novice, in 5 minutes. I could ask a few questions and know I'm dealing with a novice. And if I was an evil person who wanted to take advantage of somebody, I could. I'm not, and I don't. But those sharks are out there, and they're real. So, I think people wake up, selling a business is a mindset. I want to maximize the potential, but more importantly, I want the right outcome. Am I going to keep working? Am I young and just diversifying assets and want to keep rolling? Or am I 70 and want to ride off to the cabin, and go fishing every day? What am I trying to accomplish? And then think about who all the potential buyers are for that business and which ones potentially align better with what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. Once you've navigated all of that, I believe heavily in hiring a competent team of professionals to help you do tax planning and trust assessments and help you put the structure in place to deal with the windfall that you're about to receive. And let's make sure we've got competent legal counsel to make sure that our contract is optimized and we're not being taken advantage of as a seller. And let's make sure that we've got the proper representation, whether it's an investment bank, a broker, dealer, somebody to help us get maximum value for that business while accomplishing the goals. And sometimes it takes a while to get a business prepared for sale when your goal and objective is maximize the potential outcome. But once you become a seller, then be a seller. And certainly private equity is the largest economic force on the planet today. Wow. If you took their 5 trillion plus in assets under management and said, let's find from a GDP perspective, this would be the third largest economic force on the planet behind the US and China. And literally more than 50% of all merger and acquisition activity on the planet involves private equity on one side of the table, the other, or both. So the end result of that is, if you're a business seller, there's a better than 50-50 chance you're going to be selling to private equity, either a strategic buyer who's doing a roll-up that's going to put you with a collection of other companies, or potentially they're going to make you a platform and back you while they then work with you to build that empire, moving forward. So if I'm 70 and I'm wanting to go to the lake, I'm probably not wanting to be a platform for a private equity firm that wants me to work twice as hard as I was working for the next 5 years, and sell it again. Maybe I want a strategic who is owned by private equity, so I get some of the benefits of the rollover equity and the potential upside of the investment. But I'm not the one in the limelight per se. I'm a cog in a wheel. And so there's so many different variations, out there, but is private equity a force to be reckoned with? Sure. And unfortunately, I really hate to say it, but I wrote the first book up there. The private equity playbook was to try to educate and provide call it a primer of just basic understanding, because I can't tell you how many times now I've gone into a room with 100 accomplished executives or more and given a basic 10-question quiz on private equity that you could get all the answers to in that book, and no one passes.
Yeah.
They think they understand it, but they really don't. And so, boy, that's a long answer to a short question, but
it was a long answer, but it was a very detailed and very good answer. So we have a commercial to go to, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the differences of the two different buyers, your strategic buyer and your financial buyer for people. Sure. Okay. So let's just go pop over to our commercial break here.
Entrepreneurs who start a business ever get to $1 million in revenue.
How many percentage billions?
Only 4% of the 7% who get to $1 million in revenue get to 10 million.
And how many times did you do it?
Oh, dude. Every time. As an engineer and a pilot, that in life we need a plan. Complete plan. Things change. I was a CEO when planes flew into buildings, during great recessions, during pandemics. Life throws us curveballs. They seem to be coming faster than they used to nowadays. And you have to be able to adjust. But, I'm going to talk to you just for a second about an exercise. I teach this. I'll get to that in a minute. But, if I told all of you, go get in a car and drive, you'd be like, yeah, okay, I can do that. This dude's crazy. I have no idea what the hell he's talking about. Where would you go? Most people would probably stay within 5 minutes of this hotel thinking, screw this LA traffic, and it's like, this guy's nuts, I'm going back to the hotel. It's like, that is people's life. They're not planning. But if I told you all, get in a car and let's drive to New York City. I'm gonna come over here and embarrass these people now. Okay. Let's go to New York City. Well, now you can say to yourself, well, God, unless I drink a 12-pack of Red Bull, I'm gonna have to stop. I'm gonna have to pee. I'm gonna have to get food. I'm probably gonna have somewhere I'm gonna sleep. Who's gonna feed the cats and the dogs and get my mail? There's all these things that you would then think about if you knew where your destination was.
QP knows how to do things in style. This is amazing. Look at the view. Look at the view. Welcome to Viva Las Vegas. Just went through 3 security doors and we're at the Palms Place penthouse. Let's go check it out. Come on with me. And we couldn't get Ryan Reynolds, so the next best thing, we brought Aviation Gin.
Okay, guys, let's get out there and make a difference.
And that is, social media was meant to connect people, to build meaningful relationships. And as society evolves, the big players didn't, because the big players said, well, you know what, we are going to do what we know how to do, which is we're going to sell ads. I mean, this is everybody connecting, people meeting each other, discovering interesting things about people. And that was the vision that we had at QP.
This guy's got the right idea.
Because people were asking me the same question. So why were they coming to me? I must have something unique to offer them. And how can I help them create that transformation? That's how I figured out what my superpower was.
All right, we're back.
All right.
Okay, so exiting, we have 2 kinds of buyers. We've got a strategic buyer and we have a financial buyer. Tell us a little bit about the difference between the two. And do we plan when we start our business to think about those buyers in mind as an exit?
So I think when we start a business, let's answer that part first. When we start a business, we start with the mindset that at some point down the road, we are going to sell this business, period. Full stop. Whatever we've created, this empire at some point needs to get monetized. So I need to be conscious of that as I'm building the enterprise, as I'm growing the business and thinking about what are the things that I need to do to make this business attractive to a potential buyer. You don't necessarily need to know who that buyer is when you're starting, but you kind of need to build to sell, and have that in mind. If you can do that, that's great. If not, you can get any business prepared for sale at some point, and it just takes a little bit of time to do that. But when I think about strategic buyers and I think about financial buyers, 2 separate types of classes. So first of all, a strategic buyer, simply stated, is just when one company buys another. That's it. Doesn't matter, how big they are, whether they're owned by private equity, whether they are public or private. When one company buys another company, Facebook buys WhatsApp, when something like that happens in the world,
Acquisition, right? By acquisition.
that would be, it's a merger, it's an acquisition. When one company buys another company, that's a strategic buyer. A strategic buyer is an entity. It's a company buying another company.
Yeah.
And within that universe, there's usually two different kinds of strategic buyers. So, and I'm not thinking public-private. I'm thinking there's turn the lights on, turn the lights off. And so, yes, that's what
I have to say, when I read the book, I'm like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Brilliant.
So you got that graphic flew up there. So think of it this way. Let's say, and I've run and built companies in both ways. So one company I built, I was a strategic buyer because I was a company buying 34 other companies, putting them together. But essentially, I was jettisoning the entrepreneur who founded them, maybe giving them a 1-year consulting agreement. And I was essentially fully integrating the businesses into the mothership. And then the entrepreneur would typically ride off into the sunset. In 34 cases, only one time did the entrepreneur stay in the organization.
Wow.
And so I'm a strategic buyer. Turning the lights off is a colloquialism for, as you're walking out the door, because I fully integrated, you're going to turn the lights off on your business and your empire and your name, and it's gone, and I'm taking over. And so when would that be attractive? For the person who's 70 that wants to retire and, says, hey, I'm done. No more game left. I want to go relax and see the grandkids or whatever. It's like, hey, that's a perfect fit. Compare and contrast that, though. My brother and I owned an insurance agency for 15 years, and my brother was in his 60s. His name's Mike. Hi, Mike, if you're watching. And Mike wasn't ready to retire. So in his case, a strategic buyer who would keep the lights on would be attractive. And so in the last company I built that was a roll-up, I bought 23 companies, and 21 of the 23 entrepreneurs are still there. I would have had all 23 stay, but a couple really were 70 and wanted to retire. And so, there are different ways of doing that. For me as the buyer, usually it has to do with revenue and the security and the risk. So if I'm buying a business, how secure is the revenue stream that I'm buying? Does it require the entrepreneur to stay in order to de-risk the potential of losing the revenue that I just paid a bunch of money for? And if I need the entrepreneur to stay, I'm going to make them an aligned rollover investor in the mothership, and I'm going to make them stay, and I'm going to want them to stay. And if they want to ride off into the sunset, they better have a really strong number two, or I better have someone on my bench ready to go in and run it, because I need to de-risk, that potential to lose the business that I just bought. And so there's been companies I run where I've done it that way. And then other times it's, hey, you know what? I have to have the entrepreneurs to stay because of the way the relationship selling plays out, the short-term nature of the revenue streams. And if the entrepreneur goes away, I can't guarantee the revenue stream. So then I'm going to be a strategic buyer, keeping the lights on. You don't get to leave. You have to stay. So that's those are the two types of strategic buyers: those who let you leave, and those who put handcuffs on you and chain you to the door and say, no, not so fast. I need you to be here for some period of time. It might be a 2 or 3 year commitment, but there needs to be a nice long-term handoff so that we can manage those relationships from one ownership period to another. And so that's strategic buyers, a couple different versions of them. On the financial side, a financial buyer brings a checkbook. They're not a company.
Let me ask you something, Adam, before you go into the financial side. So if you own a company, and there's lots of people in the audience that own companies, and they're thinking about, okay, I want to have a strategic buyer. How do they reach out to you? Like, how do they find people like you who buy companies? And do they reach out to you directly? Do they do a Google search? Like, how does that happen for a company who doesn't maybe have the great opportunity like I do to know you, Adam? Like, how do they find people like you?
All of the above. So
Gotcha.
Really, the strategic buyer, the person who wants to acquire companies, has some effort to build, think of it just like a sales funnel for any other activity. Typical for me, if I'm in an industry, I'm going to hire what's called a buy-side advisor to, who really literally is just going to help me build a funnel of the 5,000 companies who are in my industry. And I'll give a plug to Harvey and Company, Critical Point Partners, a few that I work with regularly. And their role in life is, hey, I'm a company, I got capital, I want to buy, 40, 50 companies over the next 10 years or more. And they help us build the funnel that I load up top of the acquisition machine. Here's 5,000 potential opportunities. They help me find that. So there are people out there who are doing nothing but looking for companies in a specific industry to buy.
Well, I always wondered how that happened, right? Because, you hear lots about like people like yourselves and other folks that I know that are buying companies left, right, and center. And whether it's for as a financial or strategic, I'm thinking, how do you find these companies?
Yeah. So I do it three ways. There's three things I do. So first, I'll hire a buy-side advisor to help me build a funnel. Second thing I'll do is a part of my website will be dedicated towards sell me your company. It sounds comical, but literally, if you go to any website of a company I run, there's a tab, sell me your company, and you can click there, and people in an industry kind of learn, hey, I knew this guy, I heard of that company, knew this lady, and it's like, and so bought their company. Maybe I'm going to reach out to them. I mean, very quickly, if I'm buying 20, 30 companies in an industry, people know, hey, there's this company out there who is buying a bunch of companies in our space. And I knew that person and they sold, I'm going to reach out to that company. Yeah. So I want to make an inbound direct to me window that they can walk through. So there's the tab on the website, there's the buy-side advisor. And then frankly, sometimes, in my books, I talk about building an advisory team. So if a company wants to sell and they have the services of a broker dealer, an investment banker to represent them, and really the only difference there is just dependent on size. Larger companies would have investment banks. Smaller companies would tend to have broker dealers or broker. Think of a broker as a realtor for a business. A realtor helps you buy and sell a house. A broker helps you buy and sell a company. And so those people would then do the Googling and finding who's buying companies in this space, and they would reach out to me. So about a third of my deals would usually come from a buy-side advisor like a Harvey and Company or a Critical Point. About a third would come to me from broker dealers or investment banks who are doing their outbound reach, on behalf of a seller. And then about a third walked in my front door and came in through the window on my website, and they found us that way. And so I think there's a concerted effort for buyers to find companies. Certainly a seller can be proactive and be reaching out to people that they know are buying companies in an industry or they think there might be a fit. But let's face it, we're not all realtors, right? So it is an area of expertise, and people do develop a really good expertise in doing that. So seldom would I recommend that people just go out on their own and say, I'm going to be for sale. Let me go find a strategic buyer, that does this or that, or a financial buyer. I think selling your business is probably the largest transaction of your entire life. And in order to do that and do it well, most people it's their first time selling. And so they need to level the playing field to make sure that the sharks aren't going to eat them alive by having a team of professionals assembled worth the price of admission, to make sure you're maximizing the value of the business, and to make sure that you're maximizing then also the conditions of the sale, the terms and conditions, to minimize trailing liabilities or any other issues that could come up down the road post sale, and to maximize the tax benefit, through the trust network and
all that wonderful stuff, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I can't say her name. Sorry. What are you looking for in the company before buying?
It's Yulia.
Yulia, thank you. I think one of the things, one would think as a business owner that, well, you have to be profitable to sell a company, that the only value proposition at the table is that it's a profitable company and that there is risk mitigation has happened. But is there a time when that's not necessarily the case, that there might be IP or there might be goodwill attached to the company that has a value attached to it, and there might not be profitable? There might be a different strategic reason.
Yeah. So Yulia asked probably the best question any human being can ask, because when you are buying companies, the strategy, I call them filters, how I
Yep.
think about, I think that when you're an acquirer buying businesses, you can make horrific mistakes that will bury you and your effort and your dreams
Wow.
quickly. You really need to understand and think about, before you look at any business, what does good look like? What are we trying to accomplish? And there may be some financial aspects that you mentioned. For me, if I'm, let's say, at 10% EBITDA margin, I'm
Yep.
not going to buy anything below that, because below that I'm diluting my own margins. And that's the quickest quickest way to a train wreck is to lower my overall earnings. Thank you,
Yep.
shareholders, give me more money, I'm going to lower our earnings. So I mean, for me, if I'm at 10%, I'm looking for companies that are 10 to 15%, because if I buy enough of those, rising tide lifts all
Yep.
ships.
Exactly.
So there may be financial metrics. I'm looking for certain size revenue, earnings, certain industry verticals, that I want to break into. Normally, there's three strategies when someone's doing buying a bunch of companies. Generally, it's like I'm building density in my existing business, my core business. I want more of the same. So I'm
Yep.
buying people who would
More market
historically be
saturation.
thought of as competitors. I may be looking to make strategic pivots because I don't like the competition in my current core market. So I want to make some strategic pivots to find some blue ocean, some MBA speak for, some new markets that I can get into where there's not as much competition, where I'm not commoditized, and I can charge a higher price and focus more on service rather than just on price. And then other times I want to extend the geographical reach of what I'm doing. I'm a US based company, but I'm only on the West Coast. So I want to get on the East Coast. Or maybe I'm a US company, I want to invade Canada, and I'm learning how to do business in mainland Europe by doing business in Canada. And then I'm going to jump across the pond and land over in the UK. So there's different strategies, but generally I'm building density in my existing markets. I'm adding strategic capability, or I'm extending my geographical reach. Those are kind of my three strategies, but it's mostly important to understand, what does good look like? Otherwise, what happens is you chase everything and convince yourself that everything is good. And when you have 5,000 targets to look at, that can create problems. I always tell a baseball analogy here, just real quick. You think about a baseball player, a person who hits a baseball, and 6 out of, figure the best baseball player on the world ever in the history of the game was Ty Cobb. And Ty Cobb made 6 outs for every 10 at bats. When you're buying companies, you got to bat almost 1,000. You got to be perfect. You buy 20 companies, maybe you can afford 1 to go south. 19 need to be good. And so you really need to spend time thinking about what good looks like. Now, some people would say, I am looking for distressed assets. I want to buy companies that are underperforming because I'm a fixer. Well, I'm not a fixer. I want to buy good companies run by good people who think like I do, who take care of people, who have all these positive attributes. Culture is an important factor when I'm looking at businesses and I'm building an empire, because I'm going to put a bunch of businesses together. And if the entrepreneurs are staying, I need people who think alike, that I can, these are people who've never had a boss before.
Yep.
I'm going to put a saddle on them for the first time, and I'm going to say, follow me and lead, and I got to get them all singing Kumbaya around one fire. And,
that's hard to do, because you've got multiple different personalities. You've got different behavioral tendencies, right? Like, dominance and, influence and what have you. How do you navigate that? Because that could be potentially a landmine.
Well, first of all, I think going back to just the financial profile of the business too. Yes, I want them to be profitable. Yes, I want them to have good free cash flow. Why? Because I'm going to use other people's money to buy that company. I'm going to leverage some debt, on the empire to do that. Use some equity if needed, but I want to preserve that equity so that I can buy more and more companies, and I want to be able to service the debt that I'm going to add on to the business. So I'm looking for companies that are cash flow positive, good, good earnings. Their margins are higher than mine, equal to mine. They're in verticals that I'm attracted to. And then you get to the personalities, and it's like, you know what, if I find a great business but an entrepreneur that I could never put a saddle on or never get them to work well with others, I pass.
They're uncoachable, right? They're not coachable.
I pass. It's like, boy, that's a headache I don't need. I want to focus my time and energy on growth, not on fixing someone else's problems. So there are people out there who buy distressed assets. I just happen to not be one of them. There are people who buy fixer-uppers. Think of it in real estate. Sometimes people buy distressed properties because they're going to rehab them. Great. I don't have time to rehab companies because I'm usually running them for a private equity firm, which means I've got a short period of time to hit a home run.
Shareholders to be accountable to, right?
Exactly. And so I want to buy good companies that are accretive to what I'm doing. And in that short period of time that I've got, I don't have time to fix a bunch of bad companies. I want to buy nothing but good companies, put them together, harness the collective power of those entrepreneurs, and ride that to a successful exit.
Yeah. And so we talked a lot about the strategic buyer, and we've talked a little bit about the financial buyer. Which is more likely to happen in most case scenarios? A strategic buyer or a financial buyer?
Boy, it depends on the industry and depends. But there's a lot of depends there. So a lot of qualifiers. What I'll tell you is right now, 50% of all companies bought and sold are bought and sold by private equity. However, a subset of that are private equity-backed strategics. Historically, everyone would tell you that strategic buyers have the ability to pay more.
Yeah.
So there's more activity with strategic buyers because they can harness synergies. They can help you improve your operations. They can absorb your back office and infrastructure costs and leverage it across a bigger empire. And while that always, is the potential case, the reality is that a lot of times strategic buyers move very slow, especially if they're public. It could take them a year to get a deal done. It could be announced publicly well in advance and then not happen. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, they think of strategic buyers as potential. I want them in the mix, but a financial buyer is going to give me certainty of close, a valuation that's probably in today's world of inflated valuations and inflated multiples, probably going to be the same, if not more. And they're going to be able to close it much, much faster. And so I've got an easier path with a financial buyer. But I'm going to talk to the strategics because I want to keep them around and get top value, and maybe they will be the best.
Might be a bidding war, even. You never know.
Could be, but so I don't discount either. I wouldn't say either is more predominant than the other. I would say if you had to just do math, there's probably still more companies being sold to strategics than there are to financial, because strategic just means company buying company, and sometimes private equity owns companies that buy companies. And so a lot of that M&A activity is PE driven, but it's done by a strategic. So if I was going to parse words in the most technical of sense, strategic probably still leads the way. There are plenty of other classes of buyers. Someone can go public, do an IPO. Yep. Not a lot of that activity going on in today's world. So difficult to go public. Most people, I think, go public too small, and the equities are too thinly traded. And what they're really doing is they're just adding a layer of complexity to their life that is massive. You still have ESOPs out there where you sell the business to your employees per se, or grant it to them. Yep. There's only 6,717 of those in existence today. But that's another path. Sometimes you think of dentists or doctors or landscape companies or dry cleaners, and potentially they may sell to another operator, an owner operator who's like, hey, I'm going to exit stage left. You're going to come in stage right and keep running the business that I've got going. I see that, most frequently in medical practices where you have a dentist, say, as an example, who's aging out, brings in a young partner, and then over about a 3-year period, they do a handoff. Young person takes over the practice, old guy walks out the door. There are many styles of buyer. The two most common are strategic or financial, and then the rest of them are kind of in the margins.
In between. And how does, we talked like before the show, we talked a little bit about branding, company branding versus personal branding. And one of the things that you said is, your goal is to build a brand that people frankly, just want to own and are willing to stretch a little more to obtain. So how does brand play a role in, like a better brand, a less known brand? Like, how
Yeah.
does that play a role in the sale of a company or even the acquisition of a company?
Yeah. So when I think this is a great topic. We could do an hour just on
Yeah, we could.
branding, both personal
could.
and company wise. It's just a coincidence, but in 10 minutes, I'm on with I'm doing a Forbes article on branding.
Oh,
Exactly
wow. Yep.
this topic.
Yep.
But the when I think of this, odd coincidence, I've run built 3 large companies, and all 3 of them I rebranded. And I did each one for different reasons. And so let me give you an example. I was running a large commercial laundry company. It was called Web Service Company. And when it was started in 1947, there was no internet, at least no commercial internet. And so Web stood for the founder's initials, William E. Bloomfield. And so every time they put a name out to the city of Los Angeles, they said, already taken. So they just like, screw it. I'm just going to call it Web Service Company, use my initials. Well, 50 years later, guess what? There is an internet. And what
now all of a sudden he's a web developer.
Yeah. And what the word web means is something entirely different than what it meant in the 1940s. And guess what? You're not going to win that battle. And so I rebranded and it wound up being Wash Multifamily Laundry. Why? Because washing clothes, millions of people were washing clothes in our 70,000 laundromats. And, it was serving the multifamily housing community, and it was laundry. So Wash Multifamily Laundry just, kind of fit. And so I would say that when you have a fresh brand with a great culture, and the brand and the culture is reflected then in the headquarters environment.
Yeah.
And you're bringing the universe of potential buyers in to see this thing. It's human nature. This is a cool company. I wasn't expecting this. Oh my God, I got to own this. And it's got that same appeal to a buyer that a shiny car has to a buyer of a car on a lot.
Impression, right? The emotional attachment to
it is. And you want to develop that emotional attachment early. So I think of it this way: if I brand a company and it's a sexy brand and it's great and it looks good, and I build a headquarters that immerses my employees in our culture, and you can tell by walking in what we do for a living and what we believe in, it helps me attract talent. It helps me retain talent. And it helps me get maximum value for the business when I sell it. And in my own personal experience, 21 years as a CEO, and looking at, buying 58 companies, but looking at hundreds over that time period, boy, I can tell you in my estimation, it adds at least one turn. If a company sells for 10 times earnings or 10 times EBITDA, a good brand, make it sell for 11, potentially 12 if it's small. Wow. If it's a big company with 100 million of EBITDA, hey, that's going to sell for one turn more. Well, that's $100 million in extra shareholder value at exit. And if it costs me $2 million to build that culture and to build that headquarters, that's a 50 to 1 return on investment. It'll be the most profitable and single investment I can make while I own that company. So a strong brand presence, whether it's company or individual, that adds tremendous amount of intangible value because it makes people want to own that asset. And what I find often, unless you're Coca-Cola, most people really don't care about the name. And a lot of entrepreneurs are so married to their name. Oh my God, it's dad's name on that business. Or, that's my dog, or
until they get 13 times EBITDA, and then they're not so married to the name anymore.
And so what I find is that entrepreneurs are often really, really attached to their names, but their customers really aren't.
Don't care.
And, as long as you're doing the same thing for the same people and give them the same quality, that's what they care about. And so getting through a rebranding exercise, unless you're a consumer-facing business that has real cachet in a name, like a Coca-Cola, something like that.
Coffey or Cartier or,
Sure. We all
yeah.
remember New Coke and what a disaster that was
That
way
was-
back then. So brand is the king. I think it helps you maximize the value. I think it helps you attract talent in a labor constrained market and workplace, which is what every industry seems to be now. We can't get workers, but workers will flock to a cool company that has a cool brand, and I want to be a part of, and so I think branding adds so much value all up and down the line.
It's interesting because a lot of the work that I do are with transitioning CEOs out of companies, right? That not necessarily own the company, but have been working in the company for a number of years. And they're really, truly a legend in the halls and the walls of those workplaces. But when they leave and they haven't invested in their brand, right? In who they are, it's a harder grind afterwards if you're looking to build career and you're building to build another company, right?
Well, you just touched on why my books exist at all.
Yeah.
For me, I knew a strategic pivot was coming where I was going to leave being a CEO and I was going to tackle a new endeavor, which was I wanted to help multiple companies at a time rather than just run one, something I'd been doing for 20 years and I was getting bored of doing. And so the book, the first book was supposed to be the first strategic pivot, and that was to start establishing my own brand as an individual, aside from the company brands, that I had built. Because to your point, I walk out the door, those brands are still there.
Yeah.
But what good is it to me? So, I started trying to find a voice as a thought leader. And by penning the books, writing the articles, building the presence and social media that I did, and all of that was very instrumental, leading to clients down the road, even though I hadn't yet left or done the strategic pivot.
It's interesting because everybody talks about, build personal brand to build legacy. Well, I actually think that's kind of somewhat bullshit, quite honestly, because
Can we say that here?
I know I swore, but it's my show. I can do what I want.
Okay. It's cable TV. All right.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, legacy, true legacy, like the Queen of England has legacy. She is going to live generation after generation after generation. People are going to know who she is. Albert Einstein has legacy. But most people don't have that generational legacy. But what you do want is you want relevancy. You want relevancy today and what relevancy tomorrow is going to look like. So I think that's what personal brand does for people, is it builds relevancy. And
I could agree more. And whether the concepts are the same. I'm adding personal value, or I'm adding, call it corporate value or company value, but they're both important. They're not mutually exclusive. You can do both. And I think that there's a strong case to be made, certainly for my whole entire life. I can tell you about the value that a strong brand brings to the table. Absolutely.
Okay, we got 2 minutes left and I need to be very conscious of your time. So I appreciate it. I think we should have another conversation about branding. Clearly, we have lots to talk about. But it's been a delight. Like, honor to have you here on the show. That problem solved. We solved a few problems today. And I just want to say thank you. And if people want to get a hold of Adam, you just go to Adam E. Coffey and
that's it. AdamECoffee.com.
You got a business to sell, because that's what he's looking for. So
find me on LinkedIn. That's where it's the only platform you'll really find me
Dallas
on.
At Empire Builder, or in Dallas at Empire Builder with JT Fox, and I'm going to be there as well. So I'm very much looking forward to it. But thank you again, and good luck with your Forbes article. And we've got one more comment here, just to Tracy Browning says it has been an absolute awesome. Thank you. We've got a great conversation. Thank you, Adam and Lisa.
Well, thank you for listening, and hopefully it was good. So Lisa, I'm glad we got this done. You were sick when we first tried to do this.
I know.
I'm a little under the weather today, but I'm still hanging in there.
Good to hear, because you've got another one to go to. So thank you very much, and we'll chat soon. Thanks for tuning in. If you like what you heard today, please feel free to share and like and comment.
follow me on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, or join me in the clubhouse. And we'll see you next time on That Problem Solved.